Welcome back to the House Environment Committee. We are changing topics to S-223, an act relating to water quality of the waters of Vermont. The new draft from Michael O'Grady.
So it's a new draft, but you have actually seen it before very quickly, but you did see it before. It's draft number 1.1 of your committee's proposed amendment with a April 3rd date and 8:51 timestamp. The two changes in this relate to the membership of the group. The first on page 2, lines 1 through 4, and the two current House representatives, you wanted them to not all be from the same political party. And similarly with the two current members of the Senate, not all from the same political party. And then on page 2, line 18 and 19, an additional member was added representing the Green Mountain Water Environment Association appointed by the Speaker of the House. Those are the changes that I've been directed to make so far to the committee proposal. I do want to actually note one other thing. It's not a change, it's just familiarity. It's in the contingency funding on page 5, section 1A. I think you've seen contingency funding provision so far that there's no duty to go forward if the General Assembly doesn't appropriate money for it. This is the opposite of that. This is, they have to go forward even if the members aren't receiving per diem and expenses for their participation in the.
The Senate did not. Did the Senate include this in their budget?
It's, I don't know. I just saw the Senate budget this morning and I haven't made my way all the way through it, so I don't know if it's in there or not.
And this language passed out of the Senate, yeah, okay. Okay, do members have questions? These changes?
Sorry, I walked in late. Are we incorporating the, or have we not started discussing the incorporation of the changes from A&R?
We are about to talk about them.
Okay, all right. Just talking about 223.
Okay. Members, not seeing any questions on these changes. Okay. So with that, here's the amendment. We've spent a lot of time talking about variations on the executive order. And this, Michael, if you could just high level remind us on walk us through the amendments. We can discuss them. I know we've walked through them a lot. I'm not asking you to do a detail, but I know we have the wetlands is the first one.
Or that A&R proposed last week.
Yes. Well, yeah. Proposed amendments on 220.
Yep. I can walk through that, but I have to say that I don't understand why they are offering it. I think most of you know that when an agency proposes a rule to LCAR, Ledge Council is supposed to review it for consistency with LCAR's review factors. A&R proposed amendment to the draft wetlands rule. It has the same language that's in their requested statutory amendment. I would say 90% of the language is the same. So that's confusing to me because LCAR is reviewing the wetlands rule on April 30th. You're not going, even if you put this on a fast track, this amendment to get it enacted, it's not going to be passed by the Senate and signed by the governor, go into effect before April 30th. And if it does go into effect after LCAR approves the rule, Well, anything that conflicts, I said they're 90% the same, they're 10% different. And so anything that conflicts, the statute, the session law is going to control, and it's going to override what's in the rule. And I'll give you a good example of that. The rule sets forth best management practices for installation of linear utilities and access infrastructure servicing residential housing. And it's pretty detailed. And it has very specific things to do when you're going to be putting in linear utilities and infrastructure, et cetera. But the amendment just says that the department is going to adopt best management. It says, hold on a second. The rules adopted under this section, which is the section of session law, it's not the statute, it's session law, that those rules would include best management practices for linear utility or access infrastructure to be adopted under this section, again, under this session law section. If this was enacted, it would override what's in the rule. So I don't know what they're doing or why they're offering this. So that's my first issue, because it seems like they're saying, we know we don't have statutory authority for the rule. We're going to try to get statutory authority, kind of have it apply retroactively to the rule. But that's not how it's going to work. Maybe if they had done this like early in the session and then proposed the rule, that would have worked. But with the rule likely to be approved before this is enacted, this is going to override what's in the rule, because statute, even session law, when it conflicts with rule, controls. And so that's my first question. I don't understand. And to be all cards on the table, when Ledge Council review a rule and there are questions, we're required to consult with the chairs of the jurisdictional committees about what those questions are. And if those questions require interaction with the agency, we're supposed to interact with the agency. I have done everything that I'm supposed to do. I went through the LCAR attorney, I went through my team lead, I went through Bryn, I conferred with the chair and the chair of Senate Environment Natural Resources. We have sent a memo to A&R asking them for a response to like what is this and other questions. General Counsel Guessing emailed me maybe an hour or two ago saying that they will respond by the time LCAR reviews the rule.
So for us members, like I would like to move S-223 this week. It's a pretty straightforward working group. I'd like to look at these 3 amendments, discuss them, straw poll on them, and move forward today. I mean, I'm not saying you should stop, but do members have questions on what Michael's just said, or the wetlands portion of this, the wetlands changes that are proposed here, not the other 2 parts of this amendment right now? Representative Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Michael, could you point us to the section of the amendment that you were talking about being potentially in conflict?
Well, there are several, but the one I'm pointing to is on page 5, and it's lines 3 through 7. And you have to realize that you have to read that with the lead-in language that begins on page 3, line 5, where it says the rules adopted under this section shall include, and then it says requirements for, and then notwithstanding subdivision B2E, a linear utility or access infrastructure servicing residential housing may cross the mapped area of the class 2 wetland. And then on page 5, you'll see that the rules are going to include best management practices for installation in those areas, for those uses. And that is exactly what this is. And there's like 6 pages
Of rules, best management practices, I mean.
setting out the best management. It literally is best management practices for the installation of linear utilities and access infrastructure servicing residential housing.
So what's the problem with the requirement for there to be developed best management practices? If they already exist, then those are the best management practices.
The problem is it says under this. It says under this section. And so these were not adopted under that section. These were adopted under the authority that the A&R asserted for adoption or amendment of these rules, which is 10 VSA 905 A18, I think.
So it's a timing issue that they're.
Right, but timing matters because statute controls over rule, and what comes last. Right.
Okay. So if there were if item III, line 3 on page 5 were just reworded to say like notwithstanding, or, use one of those phrases that gets them out of the timing issue and just points to those existing best management practices, then it would be okay.
I think there's a way that you could draft this. It would be a little unusual, a little unique, but I think you could do that. But one of the things that you're also wrestling with is that LCAR has to go, they have to review this rule on the 30th and determine whether or not it's consistent with statutory authority.
Existing, regardless of this.
Right, regardless of this, but this cast out. If you're though gonna say, hey, notwithstanding the agency's existing rulemaking authority, we're gonna say this is gonna apply to this rule. Doesn't that tell LCAR, hey, they didn't have statutory authority?
Or it just says recognize the existing best practices that are in place. I mean, we do that all the time with CAFO stuff. It's like, there's already best practice. You don't have to like redevelop all new best practices. Recognize the best practices that are in place. And
It's not just the best management practices.
Yeah, so actually, Michael, if you wouldn't mind, the issue around mapping, for example, Vermont significant wetlands.
Sure, and so
Currently, how we use the maps, and then under this proposal, where the maps become the delineation, and
Right.
then they're actually not, they're not used for that.
all right, so on page 4 of the agency's proposed amendment, which is almost exactly the same as the wetlands rule, it says no, you can basically build a residential housing project except within 25 feet of the mapped area of a class 2 wetland shown on the Vermont significant wetlands inventory map. And then it goes on to say, notwithstanding that, you can put linear utility or access infrastructure servicing residential housing may cross the mapped area of the class 2 wetland within 25 feet of the mapped wetland. So you need to realize that the rules themselves say that the map should not be relied upon. It says rule 3.2B, the Vermont significant wetland inventory maps denote the approximate location and configuration of significant wetlands. The actual boundaries of wetlands shown on the map shall be determined in the field accordance with methodology provided in section 3.2A of the rule. And then it goes on to say, a second. All wetlands shown on the Vermont significant wetland inventory maps or contiguous to wetlands shown on the maps are class 2 wetlands unless identified as class 1 or 3. The map should not be relied upon to provide precise information regarding the location or configuration of wetlands. They are intended to denote the approximate location and configuration of wetlands. It is critical to note that the wetland characteristics and boundaries are not static. Wetland boundaries may change as a result of landscape and climatic changes. So you have one section of this rule saying don't rely on the maps. You have another section which is very, very similar to what I read from the proposed amendment that says you have to.
So you're saying there's conflicts within the rules?
There's conflict within the rule, and then there's conflicts between this and rule.
Underlying all this is a conflict with our existing longstanding legislative intent and statute, and I feel like not interested in adding this amendment to this bill. How are others? Representative Cheney?
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if we were only questioning our ledge council or doing some discussion, but I will say I couldn't support this. I think we should let the LCAR process play out.
Representative Hoyt?
Thanks. Yeah, I wouldn't support it either. I mean, the way I look at it, it's basically asking us to bless these rules, which look like they have some infirmities within them. And even if this did pass, not only would it do that, which I don't really think is the proper thing to do, it sounds like it would make a hash of the rule itself. Timing wise, conflicts in that.
I don't know how it would be implemented, and I think it would inspire a significant amount of litigation. Because what are you implementing? Are you implementing the session law amendment? Are you implementing the rule? And then I would argue that the rule can't be implemented because it's arbitrary, because it's relying on maps when the rule itself says don't rely on the maps. And so these are the questions I posed to A&R. These are my questions. I don't have definitive answers. But I'm just posing those questions and asking for a response. So to inform LCAR, I know you might not enjoy that I ask those questions, but it's part of my job. And I do it all the time, and the agency doesn't like me for it, but it's part of my job.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of these technical issues are probably reasons alone to not support the amendment, but in addition, I couldn't support it simply because we've spent a lot of time over the years in Vermont as a state, strengthening our wetlands rules and protections because they're so very important to all of us, and to be rolling them back, even temporarily, seems like that puts us going backwards rather than forwards.
Others have comments. Representative Tagliavia?
Couple comments, I think, with respect to Representative Boyce's comment about how some of what we're talking about could make a hash of the rules. Is there a way for us to not make a hash of it, but to actually be able to clarify so that this stops being a hurdle in the future? And the other thing that I just want to make an observation about, I wonder if everybody remembers a few years back, there was a software glitch in, I think it was Microsoft, where there were airports and everything else. There was a lot of stuff that was shut down because there was in the loading of new software, because somebody didn't test it, that there was basically a loop where the software would get just so far and then go back and restart because there was one little piece of the language that was missing. And I can't help but feel like anybody who wants to build and is looking for this relief, this 25-foot relief, is going to continue to come against this stuff. And there are going to be other things. And all we as a legislature are going to be seen as is as giving basically a bait and switch. Oh, we really want housing, but oh, we found another problem. We found another problem. And how are we gonna try to fix this problem if we really do want to make an exception here or there? Because there are just a couple from the information that I'm getting. It's not like we're gonna go willy-nilly and just break out the bulldozers and the dump trucks and fill up wetlands. We're looking at a couple of isolated areas. And is there possibly a way that we can find common ground so that some of these places can see the development, like the Prospect Heights can actually, if the project goes forward, even in partiality or in full, so that we can say, yeah, we actually are committed to improving the housing situation.
I can't speak for Elcar. But if Elcar has reasons to object to a rule, it will switch the burden in any challenge to the rule. And that means that the agency will have to defend the rule and prove that it is not arbitrary, that it is consistent with statutory authority, that it is consistent with legislative intent, and that it's operable.
Also, if I may, in reading your memo, there are other, like, to change state policy for 3 projects or whatever the number is, I find to be it's just like the wrong way to do what we do here. In at least one instance, there are other ways that the secretary has flexibility to address project-specific issues. The one that you're talking about, it goes beyond the 25-foot buffer, so it's not accurate to keep portraying it that way. There are unmapped wetlands on that property that they would like to ignore, fill. And that's another big piece of this. Anyway, I'd like to hear from all members about whether or not they want to actually keep debating this, whether we put this amendment into the bill or not.
Could I answer the question? I do think there's a way to make, I would just get rid of their proposed session law amendment regarding the residential housing and just go with the rule. And just go with the argument that we have statutory authority to adopt this rule. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't still questions about the rule, but you no longer have this being like the shadow, like on it. And then you can do the rest of it, or if you want to, I still have questions about like how you want to do like the consultant or the general permit. You don't really need the general permit because the agency already has general permit authority. This might not fit under that authority. That might be why they're offering it. But if I were advising the legislature about how to go forward with this rule, I would not go forward with the first part of this amendment.
Can I just get some clarification? I took the description of session law as having like only for a set amount of time, correct?
Right, and I wasn't here when General Counsel Guessing was testifying. Someone asked her a question, what's the difference between session law? And she said, talk to your legislative counsel. And generally, session law is for something that is temporary in nature or effectively something will expire just because of the terms and conditions of the language. So for example, a special study committee, right? You write into study committees that they expire usually within a year to 18 months of when you create them. You don't need to put that in statute, but what they do and what you require for them to do, that's still law. You do session law that has binding effects every year. The appropriations bill, at the beginning of the appropriations bill, every year it says not, unless otherwise noted, provisions in this bill will only apply for fiscal year 2026, 2027. But every year, there's provisions in that bill that apply for more than fiscal year 27, 28, et cetera. It goes into the future. And that has binding effect as long as it's still applicable. There is session law that is 15 years old that I know of, that's still good law, it still applies. It's supposed to be temporary, but it doesn't have to be temporary.
Would there be a correction so that it is actually temporary with respect to this event?
Well, this amendment says it's only gonna be good until depending on how you read it, 2029 to 2031. Because they have a vested rights clause in here, which is a good idea. Which allows it to go past that 2030 deadline. If you've gotten all your permits and you started construction, your rights have vested. Just because it hits 2030 doesn't mean that your rights are terminated. You get to finish out what you started.
Thank you.
Representative Pritchard.
Thank you. So what did ANR say when you pointed this out to them? What was their response?
They said that they were gonna get back to me and provide answers. And I only sent the memo yesterday. And they only responded a couple of hours ago.
Guess I'd like to know what their answers are before we vote on something. Yeah, I think we should, I mean, you explained it to them fully. Yeah. I mean, I think they should answer to it. I think that answer should be part of our decision. Did they indicate when they might?
No. But Elcar, April 30th. So they would have to get back to Elcar by that time. And usually Elcar wants everything 3 days in advance.
I kind of like to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I guess to your question, I kind of agree with you, Michael, that we don't need both. We need one or the other, or one or the other would suffice. Chairs would argue that one either, but I would argue with one or the other would suffice. And we've already got one submitted by a rule making, and that's kind of going through the process. And if they truly are in conflict, which it would really be interesting to hear why ANR submitted something that's going to be in conflict, that doesn't make any sense. But I'd be interested to hear what their position is. But yeah, if one or the other suffices, but if that's likely not going to go through for the reasons that you've indicated, then it sounds like go ahead with this.
I mean, again, pose questions to ANR, don't know what their responses are. One of the questions I posed is a question that Rep. Hoyt posed to General Counsel Guessing. It's like, how and what authority did you use to cut the 50-foot buffer for Class 2 wetland in half? And she said the authority to adopt an allowed use by rule. And she's right that they have the authority to adopt an allowed use by rule in a 50-foot buffer. If they're going to change the buffer width, that's another section in law. She said that the agency can adjust the buffer width under 913, but it's actually under 914 that the agency can adjust the buffer. And under 914, they have to adjust the buffer during a wetlands determination, not as a categorical conclusion. And the AG even said that in the AG's advisory opinion to ANR, to the governor, when the governor issued the executive order that cut the buffer width. The AG said you can't categorically half the buffer. You have to do the wetlands determination under 914. So if you had an allowed use that was in 50 feet, that'd be fine. But you have now an allowed use within 25 feet with a different buffer, and you didn't go through the process to to set that buffer with.
So I think you're making my argument for me, that the LCAR rules, the rules that are going to LCAR likely won't go through because there's enough issues with it.
You
Likely
can
goes
fix a
through-
rule. You can fix a rule.
Produce new rules that are.
LCAR can ask an agency to fix a rule. Whether this can be fixed to the satisfaction of everyone, I don't know. But LCAR, and the legislature fix rules all the time. They come in, there's something wrong with them. Hey, can you do this? And we work with our office, and I say we, Ledge Council, work with them all the time on their rules. Some rules are great. You're gonna see a hazardous waste rule that's coming through. It's like 5 times the size of this. And it's great. And, it just, sometimes things fall apart.
Thanks.
Representative Pritchard.
When was the last time the governor's executive order was challenged?
Well, most of the time, executive orders don't have a binding effect. The last time that I can remember the debate about an executive order is there's actually a statutory provision that says at the beginning of each biennium, the governor can issue a executive order for the reorganization of government. But it can be denied by one body, like not passed by one body, and that raises a separation of powers and presentment and enactment clause issue. That's the last time I remember an executive order having that kind of debate.
When was that?
Oliver Olson was still a representative. So 2015, maybe? And you will see a memo that I wrote about the separation of powers cited by the administration, the current administration. And I cite them back. Like we both have the same separation of powers analysis, but we have different conclusions. But we do, it's the same analysis, it's just different conclusions. And the governor doesn't have specific constitutional executive order authority. Many governors do. So how governors, including the Vermont governor, that don't have explicit executive order authority, they have to imply it from their constitution and their take care clause. And that's not always clear. And the boundaries of that are not black and white. In fact, the Vermont Supreme Court said that the boundaries between the branches are gray. So what authority that the governor has, it's implied, and it's not black and
Yeah, I'm just trying to, it just seems strange to me. It's a short amount of time. What do you think the governor's rationale is for this executive order?
Well, no, I think if his rationale for the executive order is in the executive order. And it's also in the summary of this rule that they have declared a housing emergency. There needs to be a certain number of housing units built within a certain number of time. There's a assertion that the regulatory restrictions on development, whether it be wetlands or otherwise, is going to prevent meeting those development of those housing units in that designated time.
Is that assertion accurate?
I can't comment. And then But there have been attempts to address the issue in the legislature, and the legislature chose different alternatives. And therefore, the governor felt the need to go forward with the executive order. But then the Secretary of Natural Resources herself said that she believed rulemaking was necessary to implement the wetlands provisions of these. And the Attorney General, because the pro tem and the Speaker of the House asked the Attorney advisory opinion on the constitutionality of the executive order. AG's opinion said Secretary has rulemaking authority that needs to be exercised through rulemaking and not through the executive order. And that's what this is.
I just find it hard to believe we can't hear housing quotas without filling in wetlands.
Right, so the question before us,
Yeah.
do we want to include this on this bill, you guys? We
No.
have to get through
Okay,
this
sorry.
question
I don't
and
want to.
move on.
Yeah.
We are wasting time right
Yeah. Okay,
now.
well, I'm just trying to
I need folks to
understand.
voice their opinions.
No,
Thank you, Representative Morris. Or Representative Logan, like folks who haven't spoken, labor.
I think the issue is the mapping,
I'm sorry.
boots on the ground. Mapping, but it's truly wetland. What's the definition 50 for one person may not be the definition 50 for another. Therein lies your 25-foot variation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. But I'm still, this is like a puzzle to me. I'm still trying to process the pieces. We have an opportunity in a few places, it sounds like a one, familiar with, from another legislator, that, is it indeed a wetland or not a wetland? And, so the answer I got is, it isn't entirely a wetland. Talking about the Prospect Heights.
Right, but you're talking about changing statute for the whole state.
Oh,
One,
that's one of the things that is the puzzle that perplexes me a little bit. But it does have a expiration date. We need housing. We don't want to bury all our, it's not a class 2 wetland, or is it a class 2 wetland?
yes. And it. Representative Logan, are you with us?
That's why you spoke to me.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Again,
I would just echo what Representative Sackowitz said. Thanks.
right, I guess we'll just do a straw poll. All those in favor of including this on 223?
May I ask you a question? Are we just talking about section 2 right now? We're not talking about section 3 yet, right?
Yeah, I think it is section 3.
Section 3 is.
Three of the 5 sections sort of go together.
Yeah.
Not the general permit, and it's not the,
Right, sections 1 and 2, I guess.
1 and 2,
and there's section. One more section.
which is just dates.
Right. Who wants to include the wetlands and allowed uses? Section 2 and section 3, or section 2. On S223. Raise your hand. 2, 3, 4. 5. Right, so those who don't want to include it, raise your hands. Representative Logan.
I'm raising my hand.
All right, so 5-6 vote, we are not including it on this tick two. Moving on, to section 3. Michael, did you get enhanced language from the agency on this general permit?
Did not.
Okay.
Are they supposed to provide enhanced language?
No, but I think maybe, I guess we need to walk through it.
First, the agency does have general permit authority. There's specific provision in rule for general permit authority. And there is authority, that statutory authority for that in they say 913, arguably. And so what they're proposing is that on or before July 1, 2029, the secretary shall publish a draft wetlands general permit pursuant to that authority for the secretary to issue permits for residential housing projects and related utilities. Prior to issuing the draft wetlands general permit, A&R shall provide an opportunity for stakeholder engagement and public notice and comment, and shall convene at least 2 public meetings regarding the draft general permit. No later than January 1, 2030, they shall issue a final general permit for residential housing projects and related utilities. At a minimum, the general permit shall include best management practices for wetland protection during and after construction, applicable to all projects authorized under the permit. Authorize broader impact allowances for managed or highly degraded wetlands where ecological function is demonstrably diminished, such as managed wetlands. Mitigation ratios for impacts to manage.
Can we just look, I don't know what that means. Authorize broader impact allowances for managed or highly degraded wetlands
I had the same question.
where ecological function is demonstrably diminished.
Sure, so in the wetlands general permit authority, the agency can issue general permits.
I mean, would that still be a significant wetland? That sounds like more of a class 2 wetland or 3 wetland that they're talking.
Yes, it is, but basically what I read that to mean is that when you have a general permit under the rule, the allowable activity shall have no undue adverse effect on protected functions and values. So this will allow for it will allow broader impact allowances. It will allow more than, it will allow potentially undue effects on protected functions and values.
So this strikes me as beyond a general permit because someone's gonna have to show ecological function is demonstrably diminished.
Well, it depends on how what the general permit applies to. I mean, the U.S. Corps of Engineers has a general permit that allows for construction in a wetland as long as it doesn't exceed a certain number of square feet. And you don't even need to inform the Corps of it because it's such a small number of square feet.
Oh, sorry, did you say 1,000 square feet?
It's like 1,000. And it has to be for residential development. From my recollection, I haven't looked at that. But so you could, depending on the scope of the activity, you could allow for a general permit like that. But I think really what page 6 lines 1 and 2 is it's effectively saying that they can have an undue adverse effect on the functions and values of some wetlands where ecological function is demonstrably diminished.
I think maybe I need a refresher on this, the idea of this, how this general permit would work. I thought a general permit was sort of someone certifying that they weren't going to have an impact, that they would abide by, let's say, a 50-foot buffer. They've done their delineation, they submit their thing, they go, look, we're going to avoid impacts to the wetland, we're moving on. Isn't that the way a general permit should work?
It depends, you know.
But this seems like it would involve agency personnel having to decide if ecological function is demonstrably diminished or the
So
wetland is degraded or isn't degraded.
say it, they give a couple, at least one, say it's an agricultural wetland dominated by reed canary grass fields, right? And they're invasive but it's a wetland and they're vegetation that's indicative of a wetland. Generally, you are supposed to not have undue adverse effects on that type of a wetland, but they're saying, oh, this is the type of wetland, even though it might be significant, where the ecological functioning of that is not as important as other wetlands, and therefore you're going to develop in that. This is what you can do. You can have an undue adverse effect on it, provided you do X, Y, and Z. I mean, I can't. I'm talking very theoretically about my concepts of general permits, and like they can be very limiting. They can very they can be very comprehensive and apply to pretty much every activity. The stormwater construction general permit, if you're gonna disturb more than a half an acre of land and you're not farming, you need to put in stormwater management measures. And it's, you would think, well, that those are all, should be all unique to the ground, the site you're on. But it's not, they'd say use this type of fencing, use this type of barrier, use this type of ditching, and that's comprehensive. That applies pretty much nationally, some form or another.
And
Should I move on?
Representative Sakowitz.
So would this general permit make it easier to build in certain kinds of wetlands?
I think that's the intent, yes.
And number 5 codifies the 25 feet.
And it not just the construction, it's what you would have to do to mitigate. For example, on page 6, line 6 and 7, the mitigation ratios for impacts may be reduced. So the default mitigation ratio right now is 2-to-1. If you impact 1, you have to mitigate, restore 2. And so this would say that they can change those mitigation ratios under this general permit.
Representative Hoyt.
Yeah, Mike, I have a question. So it looks like number 5 here, section 5 is an attempt to get around the 50-foot buffer again. Right? One thing I don't see anywhere in this amendment is something either amending the 50-foot in the buffer definition or saying notwithstanding any other provision. So if we put this in and it passed, how is that going to work with the definition of 50 feet in the wildlife buffer?
This goes back to my original statement that I don't understand what this is doing.
Okay.
Because you could, because this goes into effect in 2029, 2030, depending on how you read it. And you could say, notwithstanding whatever, 10 VSA 902, the buffer zone definition, in 2029, the secretary may adopt a general permit that establishes a buffer zone that's less than 50 feet. But that's not what this says. So you Representative Boyd, you will have something on statute that will conflict with session law. This will have come last, right? Last in order. Arguably, it would control, because this is one of my favorite statutory canons, the construction statutory closing. You know what you're doing. The legislature is presumed to know what it is doing. It says, I don't know what I'm doing half the time. And but you're presumed to know what you're doing, and that's the courts, they look at you, they presume that you knew this was gonna come last, and this would arguably control. And so. And the courts really get kind of snotty when they pull that one. They knew what they were doing. But anyway. I think Representative Hoyt raises a good point. I don't know how that they would be interpreted to interface with each other. It could be argued that the amendment controls, it could be argued that the statute controls. Because the amendment is still temporary. Remember, even though it starts in 2030, I think it only has a 5-year time limit, right? Or maybe that's what's under the rule. That's what's under the rule.
Senator Floyd,
One other thing, Mike, just, it sounded like you said that they already have the authority to do this, in your opinion. That they have the authority to come up with a general permit, right?
They do.
Yeah.
It's in their rule.
So this would sort of muddy the waters, it would seem like, if they're allowed to do this. Adding this amendment might raise some questions later on.
Well, I think what they're saying is that in exercising their general permit authority, they're going to deviate from some of what the standards are in their general permit.
some of what the law is.
Right. Correct.
So.
For example, 2-to-1 mitigation. They were saying that they're gonna have a different ratio for that. They're gonna have a different buffer. And it's gonna be categorical, it's not gonna be according to a wetland delineation. So again, that would be different from what's in statute. And then just that standard and authorized broader impact allowances, to me, that means that they're gonna have undue adverse effect on the wetland, which the current wetland general permit says you can't have. So.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah, I would just say that basically for the same reasons I was unable to support the previous section of this amendment, I couldn't support this section in that it's making us go backwards in terms of how we place our importance on wetlands and having them be functional as parts of our landscape and making those places better rather than degrading them further. So I feel like we need to be thinking about how we take all the wetlands in the state and protect them and make them better, to improve them, not to simply say that because wetland is degraded that it's fair game to put a house there.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I was kind of excited about section 3 when I was through the bottom of page 5, but then once I got to page 6, it seemed like we were going beyond the bounds of what a general permit should be doing.
Mhm.
It's just too many questions that, I mean, even in number 5, where it just says adjacent to wetlands, it doesn't even say what kind of wetlands, class 1, 2, 3, mapped, unmapped, doesn't say. But, I mean, it's just, yeah.
Everywhere.
Yeah, I don't know. I was excited that we were going to do a general permit, kind of similar to what 212 was doing with the general permit on water. I thought that's what it was going to be like, but when I turned the page, it's like, it's not quite.
And they already have the authority to do it. They're asking for us to suspend.
Yeah.
Other law. Others, comments? Representative Chase.
I guess I will continue to feel like they generally have certain authorities and this gets complicates things. But I'm curious about a general permit and I want to see the state engage that tool, whether it's like in 212 where it talks about it being just simpler, I forget the language, but like I appreciate the language in 212. I'm not sure what it means exactly, but I'm very curious in this arena of like how we can improve our permitting processes to everyone's benefit. But if they have the authority, I don't want to muddy the waters, and I don't want to roll back our wetlands protections in some of these ways without really period. So I guess I just would continue to feel like they have some tools and let the process play out. I would prefer not to pass these.
Others? Does anyone think we should include this? S223. Not seeing any. Great. We'll not include this one. On the next one.
So I think you're on page 7, section 5, the professional wetland consultant certification. I think you have options to do this. You have done things like this in the past. And you have done it in different ways. I think the best example is the current licensed designer for potable water supply and wastewater systems. When you first did that, you directed A&R to come up with a program to approve them / certify them. And A&R did that by rule, but then, and that was in like 2001. And then in 2015, A&R asked that OPR take over that program and issue.
So how long did the A&R oversee it?
A&R had they had the program for, and they still kind of have the program. So in 2002, the General Assembly directed A&R to establish and implement a process to license and periodically renew the licenses of designers of potable water supplies and wastewater system. So that was when the program started. In 2016, the General Assembly transferred that authority from A&R to OPR, which is the Office of Professional Regulation, and build all the structure that's usually around an OPR program, like a board and standards, and what happens if you are accused of something that's unlawful underneath your board certification or your engineering license or a license. How the board is appointed, etc. So all the OPR programs have that structure that's built around them. But the question is, do you need to go to a license to do what you want to do? Because the agency has approved consultants in different programs where they just say, we've approved this consultant to do this type of work. We generally believe through our experience with them that they are professional and meet the standards. Is that all you need?
The agency thinks we need more because they brought this to us. Though I am also left with a bunch of questions on this one. So I mean, I think that's an interesting place to start, is what is the problem we're trying to solve? Like, what do we need? We heard that there's 25 people on the list right now of kind of approved wetlands consultants. I don't know who's approving them, but they're on the list, available. Maybe they're not approved wetlands consultants. That doesn't sound like a lot to me. And if one of the bottlenecks is getting delineations done, I don't know if we're solving the problem that people think we have by doing this. Yeah.
Well, this will take some time if you're going to go through certification or licensure.
It would take some time. And I guess I'm interested on page 8, line 4, C, the rebuttable presumption piece of this, is that the way that, say, the on-site program also works? They have a rebuttable presumption of accuracy, or?
It's similar, the licensed, the certified designer, the licensed engineer, licensed designer, they are given deference. Their certification that a project meets the standards is given deference.
Which is less than rebuttable presumption.
Well, I don't really know what they mean here with the rebuttable presumption. Rebuttable presumption of what? That isn't set forward. I like the simplicity of the licensed designers for potable. They certify that they meet the rules. And the agency can go out to check to see if you met the rules. Now, it might be easier to certify that program because it is a pretty technical, pretty project-focused certification. I built a septic system, and that septic system meets the standards. I delineated a wetland. Depending on the time of year, it might be harder to say I definitely met all the standards. If you're trying to do that in the winter time, it's going to be tough.
Representative Chapin.
So this too, I'm really interested in and intrigued by, but we've also raised a lot of questions about it that haven't been answered, related to a number of factors. And I guess, again, in the interest of time, because I think our committee really needs to focus our time on S325 in particular. I'm wondering if maybe what the next step here is to just have one paragraph, something that we attach to this or a different bill that just says the agency will bring back recommendations for a program and the pros and cons of how a certification program would work by January, and then we can support it then and have more testimony on it. Then just receiving these amendments in April is it's just not very functional in the end of a biennium. I appreciate that that there's a political environment around this topic in the EO, but it's just not a very functional way for us to review these and make good, so that's why I'm hesitant to put it all the way in a program in statute right now.
Representative Hoyt.
Yeah, I agree with Representative Chapin on that. It's interesting. I think we could probably put something in there, just asking to get looked at, and that's what I would support. Also, I've got a work meeting after. We're not voting on the actual bill today, are we?
No, but we're gonna probably put it on notice.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll be back.
Representative Miller.
Yeah, I also like this idea, but I would be willing to go with, as long as we put something in that says you give us something back, because this isn't enough. That we could then incorporate next year. So in other words, get something back by end of December this year. We could look at for real for next year. I'd be interested next. I am getting from the engineering community that has contact with that wetlands is becoming like the long pole in the tent in terms of moving ahead with permits and whatnot. And so we need to do something there.
Well, what would you want them to come back with? Because what this language would require them to do is adopt rules. Do you want them to propose draft rules? No, just a recommended program?
I mean, I guess I'm also sort of just thinking back to maybe even maybe it was even last session. Just if the agency wants this, they can bring it to us in January and should, if that's what they want. And it would come with those things of what's the problem we're gonna solve? How long does this take? What do other states do? Does this add cost? I mean, it seems like there's just a lot of questions, and I too am interested and curious, but also thinking this may not even really be the tool we need for the job. It might be. So I think you could put a paragraph in there, but the hard part about that is what are the questions we want them to answer? Representative Sacramento.
Yeah, I also think this is an interesting idea. It seems clear that we don't really have enough time to do it justice at this point. And if the agency is really interested in moving forward on this, I don't see why they wouldn't just come to work on it some more between now and next session and bring something to the legislature when we start up. It seemed like a natural thing for them to spend a little bit of time fleshing out a bit more for us to start that conversation at that point.
Well, I guess what is the difference between that and what's in here? I think that's what we're asking you to do. Just thinking through the process here.
Representative Chapin.
So my understanding of the issue we're trying to solve from the testimony we did get on this, is that right now, although we got mixed messages about this also, a private delineator gets hired by the project team and goes out and delineates. And then it goes to the agency, and then the agency typically sends out their own staff to do the same thing. And that two-step process, if there could be, I'm not sure certification is required, but if the agency needs either a certification process or maybe there's a different tool, maybe they're fine with some other kind of approval of that out of that 25 wetlands delineators. And there's a different way for the agency to say, if we've approved them through some tool, then we give deference to and we will only check it if we flag something in the permit process that makes us want to go out. Because my understanding is they actually do sometimes do that. That's what I heard in testimony, but it's not clear when, and that's a very minor portion of the time that they don't go out and double check the private sector delineator. So if I was going to ask a question in a one paragraph, something that we decided we did want to put in statute, I don't think is necessary here. If the agency really wants to improve this process, I do think they could just bring something to us at an earlier time in the session. That question I would ask is, what is the right tool that will help enable the agency to defer, or what's the word? Not defer. Provide deference and not double check in all cases the work of the private sector delineator. It could be a certification program. It could be they approve.
Be a general permit. I mean, I think we need to clear. I think that's a good question. The right tool. For them to trust, for them and Vermonters to trust that high quality delineations are happening, but the agency doesn't have to go check every single one.
Correct.
That's what we're at. Can you draft that? Right. Yeah, thank you. Let's take a 7-minute break.